I want you to walk around Costco with my enucleated eyeballs in your bra. These 14 words festoon conspicuously across the blank page, in the middle of the Snellen chart, in the middle of the spoken word karaoke screen, crayoned in big characters in the middle of a poster out on the piazza. I want you to walk around Costco with my enucleated eyeballs in your bra. Shaking his head with laughter, the kind old optometrist approaches and checks the patient's eyes with a handheld retinoscope. Then he switches lenses in the phoropter, etc. Optometrist: how about this? Can you make out any of it now? Oh my God, I wasn't even close. That's okay. Can you read it for me now? Patient: I've known other men like this, small, smelly, childish, broken, unscrupulous, alcoholic men. They almost inevitably have brilliant, beautiful daughters. It's a fairly standard folkloric motif. I'm from Central Texas, though. I'm accustomed to stoic men, to men who, whatever the vagaries of life, whatever the reversals of fortune that life's thrown at them, preserve their equanimity. My father was a mortician, and he maintained the same imperturbable sang-froid I saw in the faces of his cadavers. Unlike this dude who weeps uncontrollably at the mere mention of his dead puggle, Lily. I have a feeling, though, that this particular small, smelly, childish, broken, unscrupulous alcoholic man thinks his particular shtick is special. Well, it's not. But G's shtick is special, and it rocks my world. And the small, smelly, childish, broken, unscrupulous, alcoholic man and his brilliant, self-possessed, gorgeous daughter have written an extraordinary book. There was something about this malignant narcissist and probably closeted homosexual who pomaded his hair with petroleum jelly and the splendid Gabby, perhaps his high-pitched cackle and her unflagging solicitude, that evoked mutatis mutandis, and however imperfectly, the mad scientist's beautiful daughter trope that circulated in so many of the movies I used to see with my own drunken dad at that old, dilapidated drive-in theater in Anarine, and Renee Claire's Pays qui dort, with its crazed inventor, benevolent niece, and an immobilizing ray that paralyzes an entire city. In Forbidden Planet, with its reclusive philologist, Dr. Edward Morbius, and his many-skirted teenage daughter, Altera, played by Anne Francis, who later starred in the television series Honey West as a voluptuous private investigator with a mole to the right of her lower lip and a pet ocelot. And in the incomparable Eyes Without a Face with its deranged Dr. Yenisseir and his daughter, Christiane, whose face was horribly disfigured in an automobile accident for which Yenisseir was responsible. Did I mention that he repeats himself over and over and over again, that he pulled me down to whisper in my ear that he uses alcohol to self-medicate for PTSD and dissociative identity disorder, disorders that he at first blamed on a botched first haircut by a barber who'd been gassed in World War I, a mustard gas attack at Ypres. Then he thought this over, his contemplative posture a cataleptic rigidity, accompanied by the buzz of flies attracted to his necrotic body odor, by the whistle of escaping gases, the cadaverine and putrescine, the hydrogen sulfide, the methanethiol and dimethyl disulfide. As I mentioned before, my dad was an undertaker. I grew up with the smells of decomposing bodies. Nah, maybe it wasn't that, he said, waving at the air with his hand. He floated an alternate theory. For his first haircut, his parents had taken him to the barbershop inside the Park Sheraton Hotel on 56th Street and 7th Avenue, where he was seated in the chair next to Albert Anastasia when the Gambino boss and Murder, Inc. hitman was assassinated. After the first fusillade, Anastasia tried to attack his killers, but in a moment of panic and confusion, the bullet-riddled monster had actually lunged at the gunman's reflection in the wall mirror of the barbershop. He said it was horrible, that Anastasia had been, quote, like a father to me, end of quote, which was total bullshit, by the way. Then he said, nah, and he suggested that maybe this was the traumatic event that caused his PTSD and dissociative identity disorder. Choking on an atomic fireball after seeing his grandma's push. And he suggested that maybe this was the traumatic event that caused his PTSD and dissociative identity disorder. Choking on an atomic fireball after seeing his grandmother's book. Shit. Fucking A. Nobody makes me laugh like this motherfucker. And he suggested that maybe this was the traumatic event that caused his PTSD and dissociative identity disorder. Choking on an atomic fireball after seeing his grandma's bush in a beach cabana. What's amazing about it is, like, I'm speaking outside of the book here. You just see that scene. I can imagine myself, and I feel like I'm in a perspective that's, like me, maybe a foot shorter when I was like 10 or 11 years old, and you can taste the atomic fireball, and then you just see the perspective of a beach cabana. I'm sorry, I'm going to add two stories that I just thought about yesterday, and it's hilarious that I'm reading this now. I remember once being at the beach with my grandmother, my mother's mother, Edith, and her boob came out, and she was out playing in the waves, and her boob came out, and I said, Grandma, your titty's hanging out, and she, God, man, that was fucking hilarious to her. And I remember once, same grandmother, Edith Fernandez, née Bird, and I walked in on her in the bathroom, and she was sitting on the toilet, and I said, Grandma, your butt got so big, because by sitting on the toilet, of course, it had expanded her measurements. Man, she thought that was fucking hilarious. Those two situations. If you can guess the right answer, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage, said the drunk little father. As I thought it over, Gabby smoked, a wry smile on her face. Finally, I hazarded a guess. Choking on an atomic fireball after seeing your grandma's bush in a beach cabana. Nope, he said. Anyway, I have a boyfriend, Gabby said. His name is Ichiro Matsumoto. He's a scientist. Half his face was horribly disfigured in a radiation accident. Half is perfectly normal. I was certain, I still am, that I'd guessed correctly. It all seemed like a routine they'd performed before, like some sort of a con game out of Paper Moon. Again, to what end, I'd be hard-pressed to say. He told me his nom de guerre when he wrestled professionally was tater tot poutine. More bullshit. He said his best friend in junior high school was MMA lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. So he went to junior high in Makhachkala, Dagestan, I asked. Yeah, he said, but I transferred because they didn't have a good writing program. And more bullshit. I asked him what accomplishment in his life he was proudest of. He said passing out drunk next to a passed out drunk Billy Idol on a couch at Danceteria in 1983. "17 years earlier, in 1966, Honey West was canceled after just one season, and Anne Francis's mole, hit by an errant blast of gamma radiation, reproduced itself 1 trillion times over and fell from the sky in great swirling storms, a blizzard of moles, pitting windshields and accumulating in drifts several feet high on the ground. This constituted a mytho-historical ectopic event, i.e., an actual event that never happens. or perhaps a herniated event, a contemporaneous event that bulges through the space-time membrane and presents as chronologically anterior to when it actually occurred. In this case, a 1966 event that herniated, protruding into the Precambrian eon. And for several days after, the children of the steppe, now extinct, cavorted in the high drifts of black moles, those vacant-eyed, feral creatures who shared the steppe at that time with the CGI mollusks and tardigrades, would no longer experience life as a continuous flow, but as stop motion, acceleration, deceleration, reverse action, split frame, pixelation, as spasmodic oscillations between paralysis and vivification. Until finally these children, traditionally depicted in Chilesian folklore with fangs with the tapeworms wriggling out from their eye sockets, now sufficiently deranged by the ergot fungi and the moles would the ergot fungi and the moles would leap at one another and rip themselves into 1,000 shreds. How then did the Chilesian steppe, whose aboriginal population until very recently lived in inflatable ball pits and bounce houses, turn white, a reflective mirror-like white? It constitutes, after all, one of LOOTDH's 3 talismanic mirrors. The mirror in the men's room at the bar Polpo, the reflecting surface of Little Lake, and the specular crust of the steppe itself, each of which transfigures by confounding surface and depth, generating at each moment that crisis of belief that is so distinctly Chilesian, so totally Chilesian. It constitutes, after all, one of LOOTDH's 3 talismanic mirrors: the mirror in the men's room at the bar Polpo, the reflecting surface of Little Lake, and the specular crust of the steppe itself, each of which transfigures by confounding surface and depth, generating at each moment that crisis of belief that is so distinctly Chilesian, so totally Chilesian. There have been 2 standard explanations. White rust formed when zinc in the moles was exposed to hydrogen and oxygen in the atmosphere, creating zinc hydroxide. The moles were chocolate, this is now the prevailing theory, and underwent a process called fat bloom, in which triglycerides in the cocoa butter migrate through the mole and crystallize, leaving a glaze-like layer on the surface. These glazed moles, this glazed steppe. The steppe in Chilesian folklore is akin to the, quote, place in France where the alligators dance, end of quote. That is a vortex of satanic Maoism with Kenneth Anger as its Leni Riefenstahl. Optometrist. Perfect. Patient. But mostly the father is sad, both in the sense of being desperately unhappy and of being pathetic, i.e. a sad spectacle. Like someone who's never lived up to his early promise, he compulsively fidgets with his shoelaces, with the laces of his sneakers. He sits there tying and untying and retying and tying and untying, trying to achieve a perfectly equivalent tightness between the right and the left, an impossible parity. Now this one's tighter, now that one's tighter, this old disgusting ragged pair of sneakers. Oh, how one suffered the virtuousness, the reproach of his impecunity. And of course, when Gabby went to the ladies' room, he asked me for money. True, these specific tropes of asymmetry, the shoulders, the laces, etc., are not recapitulated in LOOTDH with its infinite regress of fathers and daughters all the way down, but one could certainly say that the asymmetry of the father-daughter dyad is its defining characteristic, its sine qua non, although at some point they, the father and the daughter, do converge, as it were, in reciprocal mimesis. And weeks later, I'd find myself feeling considerably more charitable, more gently analytical, if you like, when I thought back to his behavior that afternoon, the tying and untying, that rocking back and forth, almost a swaying in prayer. It's the sort of repetitive movement, the sort of restricted, circumscribed behavior one might associate with autism. The lace is here, the lace is there, the lace is here, the lace is there, over and over and over again, back and forth, from shoe to shoe. Akin to the swaying back and forth, the shuckling we might observe in readers of the big character posters out on the piazza. Meanwhile, back at the optometrist's office, the patient, always behind the phoropter, that big lens machine that becomes her face essentially, her eyes without a face, like something staring out from one of Radchenko's constructivist advertising posters. Patient. Once I said, and it's unbearably hot in here, patient. Once I said, quote, "It's unbearably hot in here. I apologize. The AC's not working. Maybe we should all strip down to our underwear. I do that sometimes when I'm grading papers," end of quote. They concurred, etc., etc. She was fit and lithe. His body was covered with the spider angiomas and beer spots associated with serious liver disease. It got very quiet. We could hear the gossiping sprites who lived in the water pipes. The sun shone through the windows, projecting quadrilateral shapes of light on the walls. The patient pauses, realizing that the Snellen chart she's reading from is a quadrilateral shape of light projected on the wall. We hear the whistling of the optometrist, zippity-doo-dah, as he switches lenses in the phoropter, a motific rhyme with the whistling of gases escaping from the dying alcoholic father in Waco. Of course, there are no windows in this madman's laboratory. Is it day or night? What month? What year is it? One can't really know. A techno-utopian hyperspace. The optometrist and the patient could survive here for thousands of years. It also recalls Plato's cave, whose projected shadows are replaced by the permutating letters of the Snellen chart. Patient continues reading. LOOTDH is structured as a sublimated enticement to a fatalistic climax. The last orgy. The dance of death. But it is in speaking of the father and daughter's 1 hour sojourn in Waco, which was then considered the Riviera, the Deauville of Central Texas, that the folklorists begin to go mad with rage and desire. He had one very beautiful and lucid moment, one incongruously beautiful, touching moment when he suddenly lurched out of his catatonic stupor, during which I'd swear he had a bowel movement, and launched into a lovely, richly evoked reminiscence of Gabby as a little girl, of taking her one spring to Washington, D.C. to see the cherry blossoms around the tidal basin, to the National Museum of Health and Medicine, which at the time was located within a wing of the Walter Reed Army Medical Center, to see the tumor that killed Ulysses S. Grant, a squamous cell carcinoma at the base of his tongue. One time the three of us were staring out the windows of my office. The panes were almost too hot to touch, such was the blinding Central Texas sun. Squinting, we saw someone carrying something, and then he was attacked by 3 other people. Like all the rest of us, from a distance, they'd confused these chemistry class models of large molecules, polypeptides, with cake. The patient pauses for a moment. She's been there. Patient. Continuing to read. More than his tendency to vomit and urinate on himself and to weep at the slightest provocation at the mention of his dead puggle, Lily, a subject he himself continually broached. He'd tear at his clothes and pummel his own chest with his fists before collapsing in convulsive sobs. What I found most disturbing was his shameless propensity to name drop, coyly insinuating personal, if not intimate, relationships with Sonny von Bülow, Mary Jo Buttafuoco, Famke Janssen, Oksana Bayul, Finn Tutuola, Lorena Bobbitt, Martha Stewart, Jeffrey Dahmer, Bobby Flay, Chef Boyar. The patient is squinting. Patient. Chef Boyar Z? The optometrist switches lenses in the phoropter. Chef Boyar D. Optometrist. Good. Patient. One tolerates all his portentous, self-pitying valedictions. It's always this is the last this and the last that. This is the last time my daughter and I will ever work together on an ethnography. This is the last time I'll ever see you in Waco. This is the last orgy of the divine hermit, etc., etc. In anticipation of something truly marvelous that Gabby might interject. The French anthropologist Philippe Descola writes in The Spears of Twilight, Les Lances du Crépuscule, quote, given that the common sense of some cultures is not the same as that of others, ethnologists must perforce sometimes make use of philosophers' instruments when they are out hunting in territory where the latter do not venture, end of quote. And surely Gabby qualifies as a deft wielder of philosophers' instruments, just as the bar pulpo and the piazza are territories where the latter do not venture.